Welcome to The Circle, a queer men's conversation about men's work, men's embodiment practice, men's spirituality, and men's personal growth with an emphasis on how queer men can participate, benefit, serve, and lead in these spaces. My name is Timothy Bish.
And my name is Eric Baumier. Welcome back to The Circle. Today, we're exploring a question that rarely gets asked. Who are you when you're not doing anything? So many of us, especially men, introduce ourselves by our jobs or our accomplishments. But what happens when our sense of self is wrapped up in these roles? I'll share my own story from running businesses to training to be a firefighter and how I realized that people often engage more with what I do than who I am. Let's dive into what it means to find out our identity beyond our achievements and connect with a deeper sense of self. Tim, are you ready to go all in?
I'm ready to go all in. I don't know if I have any answers.
Well, we're gonna
find out.
We're gonna find out.
Yeah.
So, when you meet somebody new, what's the first thing you tend to tell them about yourself?
Well, I think, as you pointed out, we tend to talk about what we do. So, I don't know. It actually feels like a hard question to answer because I can't remember a time when I've met someone where there wasn't a flurry of questions right up front. You know, what is your name? Where are you from? You know, in Provincetown, are you visiting? You know, for how long? And then inevitably at some point, the question of like, what do you do comes up.
Yeah, I in those moments where in meeting new people or even conversating with people that I know, like what I found is that the conversation typically stays at like, what do you do? And so I remember when I first moved to town and I would go to tea dance or go to parties, I was launching businesses in town and like that's what I wrapped my identity in. So I was like launching a clothing line. And so it was like I was being introduced as like a designer and like, you know, this is somebody, you know, you should know. And like that's how people came to know me. But then the conversation would stop after that. And then anytime I saw them afterwards, it was always a check-in of like, how is that thing going?
Well, so this might become a conversation about our comfort zone because I have to imagine that one of the reasons that is a common question is because for most of us, we have to do something. So you have to do something and I have to do something. If we talk about those things, then we immediately have something to talk about. It's not unlike, I remember my mom when I was a young boy was a smoker, and two smokers could find plenty to kind of like talk about in the smoking of a cigarette, in addition to like a shared sort of ritual. Like, can I bum a smoke? Like the lighter, the packing, the, you know, whatever the thing is. And so I wonder sometimes if the question about, well, what do you do? Is this a version of that? I have to do something, you have to do something. Almost all of us have to. And so it's a shared experience that we can relate to. And then it also allows us like, oh, well, I learned about you, I met you, but I didn't have to necessarily be vulnerable, open up, talk about any of like the harder stuff that might be harder for me to say or harder for you to hear.
On the topic of smoking, so I was a smoker for over 15 years.
That blows my mind.
And some of my best friends who I still keep in contact with today, I met through smoking. And we didn't talk, like our first conversation was not about like, oh, you're a smoker, I'm a smoker, like let's smoke together. It was like, we were talking about like, hey, how are you? Like what's going on? Like we're actually like, if it was at a bar, it's like, oh, what are you here for tonight? And like we were able to get into like depth pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. It's actually when I stopped smoking that I found that the conversations actually got way more superficial and that I would sometimes go to like the smokers lounge area of like tea just to like keep those like depth of conversation. So that was an interesting moment that like.
So you basically, well, I've never been a smoker, so it's hard for me to say. I've only observed it. But it sounds like you're saying you're having the opposite experience. So this podcast is now advocating like you should smoke if you want deep, meaningful conversations.
No, I found that like people focus less about like what I was doing and more on like, you know, how are you? Who are you? Not what do you do?
But do you think it's easier for people to ask questions like that in the context of some other shared experience,
Possibly.
like smoking or drinking or Or even, I mean, one of the reasons why we engage in extracurricular activity, like, oh, we're all on a baseball league or a bowling, volleyball, whatever the thing is, cooking class. Like in that context, we're like, now we have something shared. Now I can actually go deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's the shared context or the shared like similarity that maybe allows us to get a little bit deeper quicker. So that instead of like two random people coming together where you're going to have to like figure things out, you at least have some common ground to go off of.
Right. So I guess we won't know for sure, but sounds like common ground is fodder for greater depth. Mm-hmm. That feels right to me. I mean, the yogic tradition talks about the importance of satsang, this group of truth seekers, all with the same intention of, deeper understanding, deeper truth, deeper realization. And so I think we can see examples of that all over the place.
Absolutely. But even when it came to not meeting new people, it could be people that I now have known. The conversation sometimes that I've noticed is that it tends to be about like what I have done. Like in my case, I started 2 businesses in Provincetown, and then I was starting to train to be a firefighter. And when I run into people, the first question out of most people's mouth is not, how are you? It's, how's your business? Mm-hmm. Or how's that training going? So they've connected me with what I do, and that's what they're curious or what they're inquiring about, not necessarily me as a person.
Well, so if we think of it from the men's work perspective, I wonder how frequently are people investigating how they are doing? So it wouldn't surprise me at all that no one is going to come up and ask you, how are you, in like a real way. I mean, we say, how are you all the time, and like the, how are you? And the expectation, I'm fine, how are you? Like, and you kind of move on. But the real, how are you? It's, well, that's probably not going to come from a person who hasn't had that same question posed to themselves. Well, how am I? And so if wrestling with how you are doing is tricky, then it'll be even trickier for me to like, if I can't handle it myself, I'm probably going to have a hard time handling from you. Maybe it's easier if I can talk about things that are more superficial and more shared. I mean, this doesn't surprise me that we talk about the weather, we talk about traffic, and we will talk about the news because a major news event happens and we all have that in common. It is a safe space where if I'm going to tell you I'm actually really struggling, having a really hard time right now, and you don't have any context for that, and I've actually had this experience. It happened to me just a few weeks ago. I went to talk to a friend. He could not hold it. It was as if I was speaking a different language, and I'm like, okay, I can't have this conversation here. I can't have it with him. And I suspect it's because he's not asking it of himself. But he has a job and I have a job. We could talk about our jobs. It's also, I think, why people with kids, oh, I have a kid, you have a kid. We can talk about that. I have a dog, you have a dog. Okay, we can talk about that. I have a hobby and you have the same hobby. We can talk about that. And anytime it's like, I'm about to ask you a question that's going to take me into the unknown or the depths that maybe I've never explored, well, that's much harder.
Yeah, it requires a little bit more trust and feeling safe with that person to really open up and be vulnerable, if that is going to be revealed.
Even a skill set, though. I mean, a skill set of how many people do you think outside of the men's workspace and other personal growth spaces have the tool set to navigate the unknown? Have the ability to say, oh, I don't fully understand what you mean, but it sounds like this. Or, I can imagine there's a lot of people who haven't practiced that for any number of reasons. And so it is daunting.
Absolutely. And it's even daunting for me sometimes to be in situations where I'm like, oh, somebody said something and now am I going to fall into old repeated patterns of consoling them or, trying to redirect them, or worse, like say like, oh, you think you got it bad type of energy, right? Like, do I actually have the skills and the ability and the curiosity and compassion, empathy to sit with them, to go through it? And I would say like many times, yes, but it has been through more of my spiritual journey that frequency of yes is increased.
Well, so a thing that I've noticed a lot, and I can feel myself getting passionate, even like thinking of bringing it up, is our sort of collective emotional illiteracy. And the experience that I've had so frequently, because I am a very emotional person. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. I'm a very emotional person, and I like to talk about my emotions and I express my emotions. But in front of people who don't have that, who have either haven't cultivated it or don't know it's available to them or whatever the thing might be, they will often see me having an emotional experience and immediately tell me that they think I'm upset. And it is so frustrating because I'm like, I'm not upset. I'm emotional. I care about what I'm talking about. And that can look like excitement. It can look like, intensity. It can look like maybe a little bit of anger or sad. It can look like some things, but because you haven't traversed this landscape at all, you don't have any ability to discern. And so it all just looks like upset to you. And then the solution becomes, I just have to try to quell your upset, either by like soothing you or by pointing out that you're upset and you shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because like I think that when I think back of times that like I have also been in those moments and folks not being able to like meet me where I was needing in that time, I sometimes say like, okay, it's not even worth it. It's not worth for me to express myself. It's not worth for me to let people in. And so maybe in that, I've kind of boxed my own self in by like starting first and foremost with what I do and what I've accomplished, because it's safer territory.
It can be it can be safe from both angles. You're absolutely right. One angle is like, it's if I'm unaware of my emotional landscape, it's like, oh, this is a safe space we can all just sort of chit chat in. But if I'm aware of my emotional landscape and then I don't trust that the people around me or the situation around me can hold any of it, then I might make that same choice to then avoid the landfall of, oh, you're gonna see a piece of me that's like an authentic piece of me that you're not gonna be able to understand, and then I'm gonna be the one left feeling and holding this sense of lack. Like, oh, here I am again, like unable to be fully seen or heard. Because my audience can't. Mm-hmm. And so I've definitely done that. Sometimes people are like asking me, Tim, how are you? I'm like, I'm great. How are you? Because the answer is no. Things are really, really tough for me right now, and I'm going through a lot of stuff. And I don't think, based on previous experience, that you can really handle any of it. And then I'll have some people dig a little deeper, and I'm like, careful how deep you dig, because I'm not unwilling to tell you. Actually, that isn't true. I am unwilling to tell people that I know can't hold it. But if I think you can hold it, I'll tell you. But are you ready to get real?
And are you ready to stay there with me too?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to open up and have you say, oh, well, now I need to go. Right? Like if you're going to help me open up, then you've also got to help me close me up after.
Yeah. No, exactly. Do you even know what you're asking?
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes people don't. They have a great intention. But, oh, you're asking me for my truth. You want the truth, you can't handle the truth. You can't handle the truth. But like if you want it, then you have to be able to hold it. Or you have to have the skill set to say, that was unexpected, and kind of work in a skillful way. In skillful way meaning like sometimes be like, oh, I don't know what to say right now. Or, kind of speaking your own experience in a way that stays with that person, even if you can't be like an expert or master advice giver or whatever the thing, but that's also a skill set that I think most people don't have. Absolutely. And like, I think most people are like, I'm pretending to be great, and maybe on occasion I actually feel like I am, and I want you to do the same thing. And I want us all to exist there.
So in your example, I heard you say that people sometimes, think they have to have the best advice or be the best advice giver, be the most insightful person to be there with, and that sometimes they don't have the vulnerability to like just say what is on their mind or what's in their experience. And so I'm curious now, do you think there are other ways in which men box themselves in by their job titles or their roles in life, the roles like provider and protector?
Yes, I'm gonna break that in two, because, and I might even ask you to ask the second part of that question again, because the first part I think is really important, which is that in my experience and what I've observed with clients and in men's workspaces and in yoga and in so many things, like the human experience and this experience of our human life can be messy and uncertain and kind of constantly unfolding. And I think what we often need is someone who is willing to be in the mess with us. So we see TV shows and so many other messaging of, oh, there's this like wise person who comes in and gives you the piece of advice that you need, and within 25 minutes of a sitcom, this problem is solved and everyone's happy. But I think in real life, sometimes what you need is, I can sit here in the uncertainty with you, and I can be honest that I don't have the answer, or I don't have it yet, or I might have one slice of it, and but I can think of many times in my life where someone just sitting in that uncertainty, and you're like, okay, because I think part of us sometimes knows this is going to take a minute for clarity to come. And what I'm really wanting is an opportunity to express my experience of what's happening right now and to feel not alone. I think most people don't often always need immediate solutions. Sometimes they do. But sometimes, like, can you just be here with me? Can I just not be alone when I also feel terrified or sad or abandoned, and like, oh, you're willing to be here with me, and you can honestly tell me you don't have the answer either, but we can be here. Power.
There's so much power and confidence that comes from admitting, I don't know something, but I know that I don't know something, and I'm not going to try to fool anyone into believing otherwise. And like that can create such safety with people too, is that like, oh, this person is just being super real with me right now.
I think maybe I mentioned this already, but I'll say it again. When I was an acupuncturist, I worked with cancer patients in New York City, and most of the cancer patients were breast cancer patients, and so they were older women, and I frequently had this experience where I would tell them, because of my brain surgery, I don't know what chemo is like, I don't know what radiation is like, but I know what fear and uncertainty are like. And so I can be here with you with those things, right? And there was a lot of healing in that. I don't know the specific challenges you're facing based on your radiation or your chemo, but these other things I can be here with. And it always tightened our connection, with me and the patient. And I think that's just an example of, if we could do that in our lives, then a lot of healing and connection could be created. And because though that is such a courageous, brave, vulnerable, unknown, often uncharted territory sort of thing, then we might spend our time instead talking about what it is we do and what we've accomplished and what I can prove to you based on certificates and, frames and awards and, Instagram posts or whatever the thing is.
Yeah, it really changes the way that we interact with people, is how much we're willing to reveal, which I think, just continuing to go back to this inquiry of, being defined by what we do and what the impact has over time, right? If we're constantly having these more superficial engagements and we're constantly connecting our identities and our self-worth to what it is that we do and what it is that we've accomplished, what impact does that have over time?
Well, I mean, one of the scary things, and I've thought about this, if my value or self-worth is determined based on what I do, how much I make, what I drive, what I wear, how good I look, how fit I am, then at some point that is going to change. And then what? So I think about this a lot because as a professional dancer and, I think the time and effort that I've put into my own body and how much I've worked with it, there are moments when I'm like, well, I am still aging, as are we all. And at some point I'm going to have to, and I've already started feeling it as I've been aging, but I'm going to have to let go. I can't let this be the only way that I have value, because then at some point I'm going to be very disappointed. Mm-hmm. So what do? Well, we have to start to understand that we have value in other ways that aren't necessarily achievement-based, and start to connect to them. So, is my presence in this world a valuable thing? And can I start to rest in that so that if I gain 5 pounds, or if I lose my job, or if I wreck my car, or if my clothes don't fit anymore, or, they go out of fashion, I don't have to necessarily crumble because now suddenly I mean nothing. And I speak about this from a place of, I'm Irish Catholic, little gay boy. For a long time, it was all about how other people perceived me. And I still, to this day, struggle with that. So to anyone listening, it is a practice. And from my own personal experience, and, I guess we all have a different starting place, but it's been a tricky one. There are moments when I feel successful in it, and that feels good. And then there are moments when I do not feel successful, and that does not feel good.
I can relate to that. And the journey to celebrating myself exactly as I am and embracing others exactly as they are is a daily practice for me. And because I have connected myself so much in the past with like what I do, and I still do it. I think about, I mentioned in the top of the episode that like I had started training to be a firefighter here in town, and I started using that as a way for people as they were asking me about like the businesses that I had stepped away from in this town, like, when they were asking like, okay, so you're not doing those businesses anymore. So what are you doing? And be like, oh, well, I'm training to be a firefighter. And so like, I fell into the trap again. Like I was originally, I had signed up to be a firefighter to be of service, but then I started using it as a way to like claim identity again. And I think in the back of my head, it was also a way to like try to gain reputation or admiration or something. So if I were to think about it, it was like 75% of it was me trying to be of service, but 25% of it was shadowy, like attention-seeking, validation-seeking behavior. And like, it was a choice I made because of that. And so when people asked me like, oh, what is it that you're doing? Like, that's what I was using to do that.
Well, okay. I want to pause. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Shadowy or attention-seeking, I don't know. Human beings are communal beings meant to live, in relationship and all kinds of relationship. I think one of the things we're talking about today is this issue of needing to be seen and held and heard by our community and valued in that way, but we don't have a culture set up to do that. So I guess I want to cut you some slack, but in so doing, cut me some slack too, to be like, oh, when I feel the need to get some attention, that isn't because I'm necessarily just a narcissist looking, make it all about me. I'm a communal person that wants to feel like a valuable member of my community, loved and protected and held and, valued. And so one of the things I do in my life, and I know people think, for those of you who don't know me, people think I'm a weirdo very frequently. But one of the things that I do that I think people think is weird is that I tell them what I like about them or that I appreciate them. And I say the phrase, I appreciate you, which I know when people first hear me say it, it feels odd. It's not a thing that people are typically hear and takes people a minute. But I do that because, what if we lived in a world where I actually told you some of the things I notice about you? Instead of, the Irish Catholic, my upbringing, it would be like, I remember, if my grandmother had something nice to say, she would say something nice about someone to someone else, say lovely things about them, but would never say it to their face. And I don't know if that was, actually, I'm not going to hypothesize like why exactly. What I know is rather than telling Aunt Pat that she really appreciated what she did, she would tell my mom in another room at a different time. And like, maybe Aunt Pat would have really appreciated knowing that you recognized her contribution and valued it. And like that could go a long way. Instead, Aunt Pat probably did, an act of service and now is left not knowing that and maybe wondering that. And if she's like me, at times probably questioning if she's being fully seen or heard.
Right. If what she did actually was of value, and was it I can only think back like times that has happened to me where I just am stuck in rumination of like, did I do the right thing? Did I do something good? Did I do something bad? Like I don't have the validation. I don't have the message coming back to me to reaffirm that.
And also when we think about human relationships, I think you're great. I love you. That was amazing. You just did an incredible job. I think that was a fun experience. Thank you for sharing that. These things are not hard to do. I mean, I guess if you're aware of it and you remember, they're not hard to do. They don't cost anything. And they might go a really long way in helping someone else feel grounded, loved, like they belong.
It goes back to like being celebrated for who that person is. Right? Not what they do. Like, it's just like simply by being and appreciating, like, I appreciate you. Simple, right? I don't have to go into a bunch of narrative and story around it. It's just, you are appreciated. You are loved.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, that's a pretty powerful statement to be able to receive.
It's also really powerful when you think about, now, if I have a conflict with you, now if I have a demand of you, now if I have a critique of you or feedback for you or something needs to shift, right? Which happens all the time in healthy relationships, or it should. If we have a baseline of, I love you, I appreciate you, I'm in this with you, then I can say, and let's have this conversation and, make a shift. Without that, it can feel devastating to be like, I'm about to get feedback. This person is about to leave me because I have somehow failed. There's very little certainty that what we have or what we share is sustainable. And part of that is because I may have been unwilling or incapable of reassuring you. I actually really care about you. And because I care about you, I'm going to talk to you about this hard thing because I want it to get better.
Yeah, I think like real conversations like that are so needed. Like I think back of like if those types of conversations would have happened to me as a young child, I probably would be less concerned with like, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the thing good? Am I doing the thing that's gonna get the praise, the accolades, right? And I was just celebrated a little bit more for me, and then being able to like have those conversations, whether they're hard conversations or not, like in that more loving way, like how that might have impacted my life today. Like I really fall into the trap of like do more. I have a really hard time doing less.
Yeah.
And so I'm a person that like at one point, I think back to last summer, I had a full-time job. I was running my own business. I was working at a bar and doing a bunch of odd gigs through town.
Yeah.
Like at one point, I think I did like 6 or 7 like part-time jobs plus my full-time job. Like, because I couldn't stop doing. I was just like more. And like, I had built so much of my identity around things that I do.
Well, I think that it's built in, right? It's easy for us to do that. And I think that it's a very easy thing to reward or to acknowledge when someone, oh, you completed this thing, you graduated, you won this award, But then I want to think about it from the queer perspective so I think just in general, queer or not queer, children, we lived in a world where accomplishment was seen as really admirable and kind of the standard. But then what we're sort of asking for is, a recognition of our being. And could that be enough, right? And then I wonder, well, even if my caregivers were capable of recognizing my being, would they have, knowing that my being was different? So it was clear when I was a young gay boy that there was something different about me. So had my family or caregivers had that skill set, would they still have done it? I don't know. I mean, I actually think that they would not have, because they so actively tried to change me. So I doubt that they would have. But like, that's also inherent in like, okay, so now as a queer person, the messaging of there's something about you that isn't great. And so in the culture that we're discussing now, well, then even more achievement. It should not surprise anyone that so many queer people are these very high achieving creative beings. I think in part because, well, this is the way we were trained to find safety and acknowledgement.
It was the way that I was trained, where I was the star pupil. I was the A+ student in order to attempt to get the recognition, validation, and acceptance from my father that I wanted so desperately, as just being me, but like had such a fear of being me that I was like, okay, well, I can't bring my full self. So, I'm going to bring him this, and this can be celebrated. And so it was actually kind of a way of redirecting as well.
Well,
like,
totally.
Focus on this instead of this.
Totally. And it's also a safety mechanism to be like, well, I'm a straight A student with perfect attendance, or, I'm the captain of the swim team, or I'm the whatever. So if my score sheet is so high on all these levels, then how mad can you be if and when you find out that there's this other part of me, this queer part of me that that to me at least felt like, oh, it's always a demerit. Oh, it's fun fact. My sister and I had a really interesting relationship when we were young. My sister was 2 years older than me. When my parents got divorced, my sister got really fat, and it was a tough time for a girl to be chubby. And so in the 80s, I remember in the 80s and early 90s, my grandmother's negotiating with my sister, if you lose 5 pounds, I'll buy you this outfit. Or, there was all this constant negotiation. Like, she was being tortured in a particular way. And then I was this really young, wiry, anxious, gay boy, thin. So I think my sister came to resent me a little bit because she had the struggle and I did not have the struggle. And so our whole relationship through high school was a strained one at best. And then when I came out of the closet to her, which I think happened in, mid-college, my sophomore year or something, or junior year, I don't remember. I felt like our relationship had suddenly improved. And I think part of it was that, she had this image of Tim as this thin, straight A, like the golden boy. And so it felt like suddenly a demerit against me, made me more relatable. And so, our relationship has been better since that moment that I came out. She was actually super supportive. But there was this feeling that, it's because now I have a check mark against me. And so that's more relatable. I'm in her mind back on her level.
I'm interested and would like to unpack this a little bit. Like, I think that's one way to look at it. When I was hearing this story, I was like, oh, is it because she's seeing that you have an identity beyond these achievements that you've had that has all of a sudden, opened up space for something deeper and a deeper connection?
I hope so. I mean, like, the thing is, like, none of us had the skill set to have a deeper conversation. And I love my sister, and I'm like, I value our relationship. So I hope so. And the interesting thing is that might be true. And I don't know that she would necessarily be aware of it if it is. And I would have to ponder on it now too. I hope it is, because that's really lovely. I really hope it is.
Because that's what I think that this conversation is centering around, is that, like, when we can step back away from our identity being connected so deeply with our work or our achievements, I think it really opens up space for something deeper and an emotional connection, maybe even a spiritual connection, because, like, it's not so self-centered anymore.
You're
right?
blowing my mind. It is possible that it's, like, just inherently more relatable to finally learn an honest piece of information about a person that has nothing to do with what they're doing, but who they are. And that, yeah, I mean, and when I think about my sister in that story that I just told, it was in the context of me being a hyper overachiever. So my grades were better than her. I did better in sports than her. I started excelling in dance and the musical than her. I started winning awards. Like, I started doing all of these things that probably felt hard to live up to from her perspective. And I was never giving her any context of, like, oh, I'm trying really hard because I'm terrified no one's going to love me because I'm gay. Right? I never said that to her. So how can I expect her to, like, know that? So she's sort of like, oh, this overachieving, younger sibling of mine, blah, blah, blah. And then I tell her a truth, and maybe she could relax in that truth. I actually really hope that's true, because I'm feeling like a little warm in my midline right now, just thinking about that, because I've never thought about it before. I've only ever thought of it as, is it more relatable if I have a demerit? But, like, oh, maybe it's more relatable because I have a truth, and there's something inherent about truth that we can feel and trust.
Yeah. I hope so, and I maybe send her this episode and have the conversation.
Yeah, I mean,
the Circle podcast,
bringing families together.
Right, but I think about, like, when I came out to my brother, I was 23, 24, and it was an accident at a bar. I had come out to a friend, and he and I were at the bar grabbing our drink order, and then no, it was the opposite. So my brother and I were at the bar grabbing drinks, and then my friend came from behind me and was like, "So Eric, how's your out life going?" And me and my brother just, like, looked at each other, and I was like, "Oh shit!" And I was like, "Well, hey Fred, I'm gay," and, like, without, like, any other words, we just, like, he, like, flagged down the bartender, grabbed their attention, and she brought over, I think we were drinking Jameson. That was our drink of choice at the time.
Yeah, bro.
Yeah, two shots of Jameson, and probably a Dr. McGillicuddy's too, because I used to do a fire and ice chaser. So it was like Dr. McGillicuddy's down as the chaser to, like, cool it all down. Anyway, there's a reason I'm sober.
I'm feeling heartburn just listening to the story.
Anyway, so we, like, locked eye contact. We did our shot, and he just, like, looked at me and was like, "I'm proud of you." And we had such resentment in our lives leading up to that. I think very similar to what I hear you say with your sister. Like, I had an older brother, and I was the overachieving younger sibling, right? Like, it was like I could almost do no wrong because I was, like, had the perfect grades, like, like perfect attendance, and, like, always showed up, and, like, like, was buttoned up. And it's, there probably was a part of him that, like, maybe resented that a little bit. But I don't think that, like, when I came out, I don't think it was anything other than, like, oh, thank God I get to see my little brother, like, exactly as he is. And there's a celebration in that too, I think.
Well, that's beautiful. So I'm going to find out. I do feel compelled to tell you like my coming out story then, if you're open to it.
Yes, please.
Because, I went, it's going to be hysterical because I moved to New York City and attended NYU dance department to be a professional dancer. And so, but the first year of my attendance in this school, I was still closeted, which it just feels like I was in the mecca of like safe spaces for a gay boy, but I was still closeted. And I went, and then at the end of that year and over the summer, I fell in love. I had my first great love. There was no question that I was like, gay, right? Like, but so I remember I came back to start our second year, and my friend Kirsten, this like really fun, like dyed-haired, like vegan dancer that lived in the East Village, she and I had like, formed a friendship. And so we were in ballet class, and I think it might have been the second or third day where she said, kind of loudly, she's like, "Oh, Tim's so much more fun now that he's out of the closet." And I just was like, okay, like I just decided not to refute it, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, so part of me's like, oh, I wish I had like had this bold sort of like walk into the room and like throw my coat off and like I'm gay, like have this. No, I was like, well, she just did it for me and it works. So I don't think I ever told her how much I appreciated that moment. So if she's happening to listen to this, thank you for that. Then we went and then we did our ballet class. Like the teacher walked in like 20 seconds later and it was like, okay, demi grand.
I mean, sometimes we want to give people like the respect of like, oh, I'm not going to out this person, but sometimes people need a little push. Like my friend that came up from behind me, like he did not have malice in his heart.
No, of course not. Yeah.
He was just trying to celebrate me, and by doing so, he kind of pushed me over another edge, right? Like I was like, well, I wasn't ready to come out to my brother yet, but here we are. Let's go.
Well, it's an interesting thing about truth. I think in both of these examples, the truth was spoken, and then the choice was acknowledge it or deny it. Mm-hmm. And denying it or lying feels terrible. And I think queer people are pretty familiar with that when you're like, oh, I'm like, there was a long time where I'm like, oh, I have to hide in very strategic ways. And it's sort of like always this like mild manipulation. And then sometimes you're like, okay, I just want to live in the truth. It feels so much more comfortable there. And some acknowledgement that a lot of the reason that happened is because of these cultural expectations. Like, is it safe for me to be myself? Mm-hmm. So luckily for both of us in these examples, it was safe. I was about to start ballet class at NYU in the East Village, surrounded by like, hippie vegans and like other queer people. Mm-hmm. So yes, it was safe for me. And so then I could relax. So it's not always safe for everyone. It's not always the right idea for every person, depending on where they are. Safety first.
Absolutely. I mean, like finding comfort in just being allowed to like be yourself without like a role or a title to lean on. I think like that's the goal here for me anyway, is that like I've wrapped so much of myself around like what I do that there is a discomfort for me. And I know that, and I recognize that when I'm just trying to be myself, because I'm not sure if somebody's going to accept me or like I'm going to belong. And like, but by leaning on, the title, I can like hope to gain somebody's respect. Mm-hmm. I can hope to, get a little admiration, get a little bit of acceptance. Oh, you work in tech, I work in tech. Okay, like we can be together, versus like if I, am just like myself, like who I am, this being, right? Like, is this being going to be accepted just as they are?
Well, and like the vulnerability to be like, you can have an opinion about my job, and I can agree or disagree. You can have an opinion about my chosen hobbies or, whatever. But if I'm going to tell you an inherent part of me, like, oh, I'm an inherently emotional person, and then you have an opinion about that, it's more vulnerable because I'm sharing with you something deep about me, and And it's just a more frightening place to live.
Absolutely. Actually, I just had a hit that, like, when I first moved to Provincetown, I actually like hid what I did because I was a remote tech worker moving into a town where remote tech workers were eating up all of the real estate. We were taking up the apartments. We were making it a more expensive place to live.
Was this after COVID? Right.
Yeah, it was after COVID. And like, there's many places in the United States and around the world that have experienced this. The emigration of remote tech workers out of cities into small towns. So it's like, we bring our tech salaries to these places, we bring our like mindsets, and like all of a sudden it's like, you know, the culture of that place is going to change. The economy of that place is going to change. The ability to find affordable housing in that place is going to change. And so I moved to this town and actually like hid part of that identity out of fear of like not belonging. And so that's really where I started to push myself to be like, oh, well, I'm a small business owner in town. You know, so like at that point I was like launching a clothing line, and then I was starting to incubate the idea for my storefront. And like that became my identity so that I could tell people that I participated in town and I wasn't just a consumer of the town. I didn't just live in this town to consume it. I lived in this town to participate in it.
So you're making me think about this tenet of men's work. And oftentimes when we are in partner practice with other men, we are being reminded that this man in front of you wants nothing from you. That like no one wants anything from anyone else except their fullness. So I don't need anything from you. I just want you to be your fullest version of you, and that's all you really want from me. And that's what I'm thinking about in these moments of, you know, we are in a culture where what can I get? What can you offer? Like, what are our shields and guards around who and how we are? And can we start to work towards this place of, I'm going to be unapologetically me and you can be unapologetically you. And if we really agree to, I don't need or want anything from you, if I can be there without agenda, then a lot of this stuff doesn't matter. And then what matters is, how are we together? How do you feel when you're with me? Because if I make you feel good, safe, heard, valued, then you probably don't care how expensive the meal is we're having, right? And this isn't to say that we can't enjoy fine things, or that, you know, we shouldn't work hard to have great careers and put a lot of pride in the stuff that we do
and provide for our families.
Yeah, all of that. But it can come from a place of, well, if I'm doing it, it's from a sense of purpose, a sense of deep meaning, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a value of mine. I could lose this job and still feel valuable, loved, needed, wanted, safe, protected. I mean, all the things. And then, you know, full disclosure, I still have a tendency to be hyper overachiever. I'm still working on this.
It's a practice.
It's a practice, and it's still really hard sometimes. Like, will you love me if I'm not excellent? So there should be a totally different episode about limiting beliefs. Or did we do one?
We scratched the surface of limiting beliefs and really just focused around like, am I good enough?
Yeah, and like
there's a catalog of limiting beliefs we can open up.
Yeah, so we could go into that. But like one of my core limiting beliefs is I have to be exceptional to be loved, and that goes to like, so well, then I have to demonstrate how I'm exceptional in the way that the culture around me will get it. So they like it would be wild if I was like, oh, I'm really empathetic. I'm very compassionate and I care about you a lot. Those are metrics that I think lots of people would be like, that sounds great, but I don't know what to do. But if I can say, oh, I make a lot of money, or I've created a new business, or I've, you know, launched a thing, a podcast, you know, that's, I think, easier. So in conclusion, when we think about all of this stuff, it doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't surprise anyone why we do it, why we put so much value on what it is we do, because we've been trained to, and we live in a world that can recognize it easily. And when we're wanting to be seen, then obviously I'm incentivized to give you something you can see. And so the work becomes getting to know ourselves authentically, and then maybe starting to show that more and more and more, and see what comes.
It's like when I get asked, like, why men's work? Like, why am I passionate about this? And it is, to sum up what you were saying, like, I want to be able to accept and love myself for exactly who I am, so that I can accept and love others for exactly who they are, without need to change, without need to alter or fix. Can just love me for me and love you for you, and want nothing from you except for your fullness.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah,
that to me is my pursuit of this work. And I see it, like, I feel it in men's spaces. Like, that's what I feel. Like, when we were on retreat, that's what I felt. I was like, oh, I am seen. I am accepted exactly as I am. That's a really fucking good feeling.
and if we all practiced it, like how much of an impact it would have so fast.
Definitely, we see the impact in these spaces, right? And that's where the hope is that we can bring it outside of these spaces.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
So when you are wrestling with relationship issues and you are riddled with sadness, but you feel like you have no safe space for it, and then suddenly you're surrounded by a bunch of brothers who want nothing from you, who can look you in the eye and tell you, I've been there too, I felt that same thing. Healing. The opportunity to experience and then learn and grow and move, and yeah. So yes.
Well, with that, I would like to invite you to close us out.
Okay.
Are you feeling complete?
I am feeling complete. I'm feeling like we've talked about a lot of things that we could go into greater detail, but I feel very complete with this conversation right now. So let's take a moment and close our eyes. And with that appreciation and gratitude, I wish you and I and everyone listening safety, connection, community, love, play. And with these words, our container is open but not broken. Aho.
Aho.
If you'd like to stay connected to us between episodes, please follow us on Instagram at Queer Men's Embodiment. Like, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you find podcasts. We'll see you again soon.